morning, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Standards, Procedure and Public Appointments Committee in 2025. I've received apologies from Ruth Maguire, MSP, this morning. Can I welcome Rona Mackay as committee substitute? And I've also received apologies from Annie Wells, MSP. Our first agenda item is for the committee to consider taking items 4 and 5, which will be consideration of the evidence heard from the Scottish Information Commissioner and also our approach to the committee effectiveness inquiry in private. Are members content to do that in private? I'm grateful. Our second agenda item is to consider the annual update on the cross-party group's compliance with the requirements of Section 6 of the Code of Conduct. Members have a note from the clerks which sets out the extent to which each group has operated in compliance with the code. Can I take this opportunity really just to invite comments from each members about their view on the annual report and indeed on the state of some of our CPGs. Can I start with you, Joe, and then I'll come to you, Sue.
Thanks very much, Convener. This is a hugely disappointing report, given the number of cross-party groups that are not in compliance with some very basic requirements. I think, for me, the idea that a cross-party group can continue to exist without having an AGM, I just can't see how. And there's some fantastic cross-party groups there, but clearly the cross-party group model is not the right model for those particular issues in the Parliament, and the MSPs involved, I think, need to find a different way of progressing those issues out with the cross-party group issue. You know, if you've not had an AGM, you don't have a convener or a secretary, so I think it's really disappointing. But there are other options for these areas to be progressed within the Parliament.
I'm grateful. Sue, can I come to you?
Thank you, and I would associate myself with the comments from Joe there. I really do. I think we have a lot of CPGs. I think, as a member, we all know that, and the competing priorities that we have. It's disappointing that so many are non-compliant with so many things, whether it be cross-party membership. Some haven't had meetings since 2023. I think it's the opportunity that we have now as a committee to take a really harsh, critical look at how sustainable so many of these are. And I think, yes, I'm deeply disappointed, but it doesn't come as a surprise.
Rona, is there anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I've been entirely agreed with my colleagues. I mean, these are the basic requirements that cross-party groups are expected to carry out. It's not an onerous task, and if they can't do it, then I think we seriously have to look at the viability of them. And it's a shame, because they are, that they're there for very good reasons. But I'm afraid if they can't comply with the rules, then we have to take a different view.
Certainly, I don't disagree with any of the comments that the committee have made. I mean, I note that on the 10th of January this year, we had 119 CPGs, and cross-party groups do form an important part of how people outside of this place can engage with their MSPs, and indeed through the cross-party groups, often with government, to get their lived experience, their expertise and their views in at that point where decisions are made. But the annual report proves a really challenging and disappointing read for the failures. I sense a view from the committee. Would the committee like to deal with this matter at a later date in respect of whether or not we continue to accord accreditation to the CPGs? So we're happy to move this to a later item?
Yes,
I'm very grateful for that. Our next item would be in relation to hearing from the Scottish Information Commissioner, but I'll pause the committee at this stage just to allow for his attendance. Can I welcome everyone back? Agenda item 3 is for the committee to hear evidence from David Hamilton, Scottish Information Commissioner, on the annual report and accounts for 2023 to 2024. The Commissioner this morning is joined by Ewan McCulloch, who's Head of Enforcement, and Claire Stephen, who's Head of Policy and Information. Good morning to you all. David, if I can turn to you for some opening remarks, and then we'll move to questions.
Certainly, Convener, and good morning, everybody. It's genuinely a delight to be back here. This is my second appearance at this committee. I've now been in post 15 months, and I think this is a really important part of my scrutiny and accountability in the system. So very much welcome the chance to speak to you and certainly to answer questions. I think I'd want to first of all say that, again, I continue to be honoured to be doing this role. Not just in terms of the importance of the subject and the topic, but also in terms of the people who I'm working with, and not just the two tremendous members of my senior management team who I have with me today, but all of us at St Andrews who are working hard and delivering quite incredible results with a very limited resource and a challenging financial environment. Now, my last appearance here, I updated on our backlog management. I talked about our strategic plan and also the legislative opportunities that lay ahead. So maybe just working backwards through that list, I think the changes to legislation move at, frankly, tectonic pace, which is, maybe that's even too fast. It has been a source of great frustration to see things that need to be done not being done. And one of the parts of my strategic plan was talking about protecting Scotland's reputation in an international forum and making sure that it was a leader of transparency and freedom of information. That is now slipping, and that's because the legislation is ageing and new emerging democracies and regimes are coming through that have got better information rights than people in Scotland. And it needs attention, and it's something that I hope, with the private members' bill at least, that will move forward. But it was a great disappointment that the Scottish Government didn't see that there was a need to change things. So I hope we will see some changes there. We have been engaging, of course, with Katie Clark, who has a private members' bill. But again, that our engagement with that has been to sort of give some views. Those views of it are public through the consultation, and we look forward to seeing where that goes, but very mindful of the parliamentary timetable, that is going to be a pressure in itself. The Section 60 Code of Practice is something that the Scottish Government is keen to look at, and that's the Code of Practice that accompanies legislation. That's something that's an important set of regulatory framework. But again, that is for consultation just now, but that seems to be getting paused because we're having to see what's happening with the National Care Service. And I have no idea what's happening. I don't know if anyone knows what's happening with that one. But the National Care Service is holding things back there. We do have engagement for an advisory committee to look at consultations, which again is frustratingly makes the implementation a long way away. Worthwhile reflecting that we've not had any legislative extension for 5 years in terms of designation of public authorities. And whilst that continues, people do suffer that information deficit, particularly in the care sector, which of course is a very hot topic just now, with 75% of care being provided by private providers who are not fully covered by freedom of information. So there's something that I think is a pressing need for that. My strategic plan, it still means very relevant. It's something I've followed, and I'm glad to say I'm progressing through that in many different ways. I did, however, commit to reviewing that after a year, once I'd sort of understood the landscape better. But I think it stands as it is. I will review it. I think the only thing that I see as perhaps a minor tweak, excuse me, would be bringing in more of a culture of access to information rather than freedom of information. And the point with that being that information shouldn't be locked away. It needs to be freed. It should be able to be accessed. And that's, again, a nod to the importance of proactive publication. And again, drawing on some international experience, particularly in Ukraine, where people were asking, when I spoke to one of the commissioners there who was saying that when the invasion started 3 years ago, people said they didn't want food, they wanted information. And that was brought very much into context. So that was a great phrase as to the importance that information has for people in times of crisis. And of course, just last weekend, we had the storms, and there's been quite a lot of criticism, I think, by some public authorities for lack of communication. And that's an area I'm quite interested to probe into and see if I can do something to give people a better experience in that environment. The enforcement performance which I have in terms of the backlog it has been outstanding, and that's down to the investigation team, who have really taken the wind in their sails and are moving just now. Last year we did 303 decisions in the calendar year. That's the highest ever. We have the backlog we had of 384 cases is now down to 55% of the way through that. So we're making great inroads in there. And new cases that are coming in have been dealt with faster than our statutory target. So that's a good news story. It's a very good news story, actually, and I'm grateful for the Parliament for the assistance of 2 temporary members of staff with regard to that. The Policy and Information Team, which is represented by Claire Stephen, has been doing an outstanding job. Again, on the consultations, very busy legislative environment they've been working with. Our communications has been a busy year for us, for me in particular, but the support they've given me in terms of media handling, and also going beyond that into the training environment, making sure that authorities are fit for purpose, and also into the monitoring of public authority performance, which is a key piece of the jigsaw that needs to be really firmed up. My corporate services team are also working hard, but we struggle with a disproportionate governance expectations, I would have to say, in terms of how the size of our organisation. There are 30 members of staff. That is a small organisation, but we basically have the same governance standards as an organisation 1,000 times that size. So it's very, very challenging and time-consuming, and it's something I hope to explore further with the Commissioner's landscape review as to how we can tackle that and get a more proportionate model. The biggest high-risk area for me is the interventions area, and I said this last year. This is where we get proactive and go out and deal with problems before system problems before they become recurring. All of our interventions have been, I think, very well received by local authorities and public authorities. When we come in and speak to them, and initially there's a bit of suspicion, but we usually end with "thank you, that was a great experience," and that's a great thing to do, because we are literally turning around cultures. And some of the high-profile ones, Scottish Government, the NHS, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, etc., real turnaround of culture, and a very, I think, hopefully positive experience for everyone on that. But that has to be resourced. It never has been resourced. It remains unresourced, and it means I've got to steal from other parts of the organisation to do that, at risk of not being able to do anything. And my capacity to do, I need to do a lot more of that, but I can't. So again, I've made bids to the corporate body to try and deal with that, but at the moment it's unaffordable, and it's something I need to hope that we can do in future years. And I think just a general observation about the FOI regime across the system is in a very, very good place. We've seen done a lot of data gathering for our 20th anniversary of freedom of information. 1.4 million requests over the 20 years is quite astonishing. And of those, 83% are giving people some or all of the information that's been requested. So it is healthy in that regard. 80% of those requests are on time. And I think what I see here is a very dedicated cadre of professionals in information governance who are trying to do their best for that. I'm balancing that off with the expectations of the public. They do primarily very well. There's more to be done. There are problem areas, but I think as a general state of health, we're in a good place. I mentioned the 20th anniversary. Just briefly, we have got a number of things that you want to do with regard to that. Again, increasing webinars to expand the scale into the users of FOI. We're doing journalist training sessions. I intend to see more chief executives, because that is the key to dealing with a lot of these issues. It has to be a culture that comes from the top down. So I intend to do more of those. We're hoping to be with the Festival of Politics this year. And again, our public awareness research is showing us where we need to firm up in particular areas. And I'm looking to see if we can develop partnerships with other organisations, and particularly commissioners. So at the moment, looking to see with the Children and Young Persons Commissioner, can we do work with them where we see a follow-through of information rights? So people asking the questions, you know the answer, now what are you going to do with it? And to see how can we join these together and make a kind of whole system approach, particularly for young people. So that's our initial thoughts on that one. So, Kavira, that's my kind of meant to be 5 minutes. I think I've perhaps overrun, but very happy to take any questions.
No problem with that, and we'll move to the questions. But thank you for that information. And I'm going to kick off, and maybe I'll kick off with the fact that this is, of course, the 20th anniversary. 1st of January 2005 in some ways seems a long time ago, and in other words it seems only like yesterday. And I was fascinated by your discussion at the end there about the involvement of young people and through the Children's Commissioner, because we've had 20 years of a landscape where we have seen improvements, sometimes substantial, more frequently just gradual, and certainly we'll get to the legislative frameworks in a minute. So, beyond just engaging with the Young Persons Commissioner, what other thoughts have you had about engaging and capturing the importance of freedom of information for young people? Because certainly subjectively my experience is they frequently ask questions that if they were more aware and if the regime was more friendly towards young people, they perhaps actually could get their own answers on it. So.
No, absolutely. I agree with that entirely and recognise it. And it's one of the first things I said. I suppose the advantage of coming into the Commissioner's role without the background of coming through the FOI system is that you can look at things with a much more critical outsider's perspective. And one of the first things I picked up was that often the responses you get to freedom of information are very legalistic. And it's something that I've asked the authorities to review to make it more accessible to young people and others, so that they can understand clearly what it is. Because sometimes when, as an adult, I'm struggling to understand what the NERTA response is, and it needs that review of it. And we actually did an experiment on using a ChatGPT to say, could you construct a response that would explain a decision? And it gave a more human answer than many of the responses I've seen. So I think that was a challenge to people to review that, because accessibility to understanding what you've been told is a key thing. But it'd be nice to see where people could take things and be given some advice as to, so what now? And I do have examples where children have asked questions, but they don't know what to do. They get the answer, but they don't know what to do now. And I think for me, that's, I'm sure we'll talk about shared services, but this is about shared functions for me. This is about how do we pass on, how do we route that together? And ultimately, freedom of information is an enabling function for a lot of rights. It's not a human right in itself, although there's an argument regarding that, but the court says it's not. But it is a pathway into that. And I think that's something I'd like to see, is how can we develop those pathways? We've done other work with the Gypsy Traveller community, for example, trying to engage with them and trying to find out how we can give people that. And usually what I find is you sometimes need to inspire so here's the advantage of what you're getting. This is not the preserve of journalists. This is not preserve of campaigners or researchers. This is preserve of the public. And actually, most requests are from members of the public, quite substantially so. Where I think we need to do is trying to engage and inspire. And again, we're looking at social media platforms as to, okay, we're on the conventional ones, but let's go into some of the other ones as to what we're going to do now. I'm not going to be doing Snapchats and TikToks, but I am going to be making sure we're into Instagram and looking at different, more edgy perhaps, communications to try and inspire people and say, oh, I didn't know that, and get attention that way. So it's a challenge that the team have got, and I'm sure they'll do well in delivering.
Well, I'm certainly not going to comment on your choice of AI platform with ChatGPT, but it is interesting to think when we look at an environment of positive publication with regard to freedom of information, those AI tools will be able to provide a different nuance on the information that currently is actually quite remote, as you say, to get to beyond I have this and what's next. And certainly in relation, your comments about the specific barriers that young people have and the engagement that you're doing to try and break those down, I think is massively important. I suppose that, in a sense, then takes me back slightly to the strategic plan and the undertaking that you gave to review it after 12 months, and you've discussed the ideas that you have at the moment of moving from sort of freedom of information to access to that information. Is that the extent that you're going to review the strategic plan, because you're confident that the strategic plan, now that you've been working under it and was in essence presented to you, is fit for purpose, is where, as a Commission, you want to see yourselves in 12 months' time?
I'm very comfortable with it, and I think this is why it comes down to it'll be very nuanced, the differences. I mean, fundamentally, there is a core role, and therefore your strategy is not going to vary that differently from it. Some of the tactical implementation of that is perhaps where it's more that there's more flexibility, but from the strategy is sound. The strategy is something that naturally everything I do fits into it. And even what I've just said there about access to information does really fit nicely into the proactive publication scheme, which is, again, something which was certainly mentioned in it and stands fit for purpose. So it's maybe just about strengthening certain areas and so on. But it's certainly not going to be a radical rewrite, that's for sure.
And sort of following on from that, there's then always the question of how well is it going? What are the early indications about success with the strategic plan and the proposals that's in it?
Well, I think I guess the most obvious one is your workload management. So we are, as the commissioners all have different models and different outcomes and outputs. For us, it's actually quite simple in terms of quantitative. You have an appeal, how quickly can we deal with it? And that's, we have now moved to a position where we really understand our data, and we understand it so well that we've confident enough to put it all on our website now. So as of a couple of days ago, all of our caseload is displayed on the website, showing exactly where different parts are in the system. And I think that's important to give people, transparency. I've got to practice what I preach. But secondly, it's about showing people what their expectations are, how we're approaching things, give people confidence that we're moving through the workload. So that's probably the number one thing that people ask about. But we also are looking at the public surveys which we do, and that, again, that's a really helpful bellwether to us as to, is this working, is this getting through, do we need to change approach in terms of promotion? That's an important one. And also our public authority statistics, which we gather in and publish every quarter. We've now put that on a dashboard as well, so that anyone can go in and look and find out how their local authorities are performing, how they're performing in the sector, and even geographically. And that's, again, it's been an interesting tool because it's highlighted some deficiencies. And people are able to see why, for example, we had a concern about environmental impact, information regulation charging in a particular local authority because it was a standout. And I think having that access to show people is that we're doing this and moving on is all fitting nicely in with the plan. So my annual report, of course, will capture all these as full outcomes.
No, that's very helpful. And I do want to touch, because you've talked about the FOI landscape and you did make mention of the legislative challenges that are, it may well be that the Parliament choose this committee in due course to review the bill, so I don't want the members' bill, so I don't want to go too much in depth on it. But I did want to ask you, if we look at the FOI landscape, is the legislative changes that you think are needed, are they fundamental? Are they process? you've talked about the slipping, perhaps, of the confidence around the world in this being the FOI system, which it certainly was at the start, to move towards. I mean, at fairly high level, what are the sort of changes that you think would aid, firstly, a better FOI landscape here in Scotland, but perhaps also how to improve our reputational position as being a transparent and open place to be?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is that sometimes when you look at this, it looks like a big thing in FOI world, but actually when you're looking at it from outside, you think, actually, that's not that. What's the point? What's the difference? So small things like stopping the clock for timing, some of our timescales. I mean, again, Ukraine, if you put in an information request, you can be told to, if it's to do with food, you have 24 hours to respond to that. Yeah. Now, we're sitting at 20 days. And there are different measures for different regimes across the world. But I would say that where we sit just now is pretty good, but it could be better. Mm-hmm. We've actually had a member of staff who's been looking at international comparators and looking at the different legislation, putting ourselves against. There's actually a UN rating and rankings for this that kind of measures this, and we think we are, first of all, we think we're too low. We should be higher, and certainly higher than England. Only because it was meant to be FOI plus, so it was meant to be better. So we can't have a lower score than them. And I think we've got the evidence to do that. So we're discussing that with them. But there is an opportunity here for us to be better and to listen to what people like Ghana, who we were speaking to just last month as well, in terms of what they're doing, how they operate, and some of the powers which they have. Which again are more significant than the powers which I have. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the bill as we've seen it and I've been involved in. I think goes some of the way. I think obviously coverage is a huge aspect. I noted with interest that in South Africa, political parties are subject to FOI. Could you imagine? But so are the companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is, again, that when you look at what's happening elsewhere, you're thinking, wow, that's a significant reach into what people can get information from. I think that the days of us thinking, well, we are pioneers in this and we can't sit back on the laurels. The world is moving on. New countries are adopting better, tighter, more expansive approaches, and we need to make sure we keep up with that.
Well, if it is the pleasure of this committee to do the bill, look forward to further engagement on that.
Of course.
Rona, can I come to you?
Yes, thanks, convener. Good morning, panel. Commissioner, I'd like to ask you about resources. Your strategic plan stated insufficient resources to meet demand, and you sought contingency funding from the SPCB during 2023 to 24. Can I ask you what activities or functions this was for, and also what you would consider, why you consider you're under-resourced, and what you would consider a suitable increase to your core funding?
Of course. Thank you for that question. I think we probably need to go back to when I came into post as to what we had, and this is something I reported on previously, was the size of a backlog that had built up, partly due to COVID, significantly influenced by that, where the backlog had built up because of a lack of resourcing. We just didn't have the resources. We are now in a position where we've got a stable model, but we just couldn't go through the cases fast enough to deal with that backlog. I therefore took the approach that we would pause the system and essentially deal with them in two ways. So as of 1st of January 2024, all cases were dealt with straight through. As soon as they come in, they get dealt with. Previously to that, they would have been put to the back of the queue, and you'd be waiting 2 years right before you even got near it. And that's going to break the system. So rather than doing that, we said, well, we just need to call a line in the sand. Everything after now is going through, and everything is being dealt with faster than it has been in the past. It's now about 106 days to close a case that we deal with.
Sorry, can I just was the money used then for additional staffing to?
Well, so the context on this is that in order to do that, we had to get additional staffing to help us bite into that. It wasn't necessarily new staff, but it was the resourcing would allow us to take some experienced investigators and use them in a different way and take a different approach to it. So a key element of the plan was the additional resourcing, which was there for a couple of years. The difficulty, however, is that it was temporary resourcing. Now, very grateful as I am for it, it gives no job security for the staff for doing it, and I've already lost one of those members of staff, an excellent investigator who I now have to recruit again for. I've got somebody, they will be starting soon, which has been great. We've actually turned that around quickly, but I'm always mindful that either of the two members of staff are sitting here on temporary contracts without that job security, and until I get something else, I can't. My worst nightmare is that one of those leaves now, and nobody's going to want a job for 6 months, particularly given the amount of lead time it takes to train people up. So that's a challenge.
So was that the first time that the office had applied to the SPCB for extra funding, and do you envisage having to do that again?
I think there's been a contingency funding for other projects, but not for staff.
Right.
And so that's the first time we've done that. I mean, fundamentally, what I want to do is to find us into a position that we've got a core operating model that matches supply and demand. We don't have that without these additional staff. So once the backlog goes, I would not need those staff for dealing with that, clearly. But I do have this problem of interventions, which I can't do. So I'm trying to see if we can have a move through on that. But the budgeting arrangements which we have are less than optimal.
So just on the interventions, you mentioned in your opening piece about you want to be proactive and to investigate systems problems. I wonder if you could maybe expand on what systems problems is and how realistic you think you're going to be able to do that if you're saying you're under-resourced.
Sure. Well, I wonder if I could ask Claire to take this one. Claire's the head of policy and information. She sort of runs the monitoring of public authority stats. And
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain briefly what we do in the first instance, and that is we collate quarterly statistics from public authorities as to their performance. We also combine that with internal intelligence that we have, so from our case monitoring system, and then we combine that data and decide, do we need to intervene here? And at the moment, we're generally waiting 3 quarters before we'll step in and address a performance issue. Obviously, we'd like to do that a lot sooner. Now, we have obviously conducted a number of interventions, and we can show that they are successful. For example, at the moment, we've obviously raised NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS up to a level 3 intervention. Now, for a long period of time, for a full year, they were performing at about 56%. So 56% of all requests were being responded to on time, which left a large proportion not being responded to or responded to late. We've now raised that. We've asked them to put an action plan in place. It's brought it to senior management attention. They are now monitoring that. And in the last round of stats we've had from them in October and November is that they are now responding to 87% of requests on time. So that gives us the ability to go in, speak to senior management, and that tends to be where the difference is made. And then we can obviously give them more hints and tips about how to improve performance in terms of performance monitoring and how other authorities go about performing well. So that's where it's really valuable, this intervention function. But as David pointed out, we have really limited resource to do that. But we do what we can with what we've got. So.
That's interesting. So in the event that an authority, for instance, didn't improve their game after your intervention, do you have any power over anything that happens thereon? Or?
Yeah, so generally, for example, in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, we monitored them for a period of time. So just at level 1, which we call it, so we brought it to their attention, see if they'd fix it for themselves. After a period of time when we saw no improvement, we raised that to a level 3 intervention.
Right.
And that's where more resource from our end needs to be applied.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have an action plan in place and they have a period in time with which to resolve those issues. And it tends to be that those are resolved over a period of time. But if they are not, then we can issue what's called a practice recommendation under the Codes of Practice. But they, at the moment, don't have kind of legal teeth, so to speak. So it's just a practice recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
But,
Thanks. That's really information. That's really useful information. So, sort of going forward, are you optimistic? I understand your concerns about resource restraints, etc. Are you optimistic that you will be able to progress what you want to do with the current financial arrangements?
No.
No.
No, I'm not optimistic at the moment. In this financial environment, I don't think anyone could be.
Yeah, well,
you know, so I take comfort from the fact that the corporate body is sympathetic, that they understand the case. We've put a business case forward for it, but they can't make that commitment, and without that. That there are organisations and authorities that are failing, and we see them on that trajectory. And we need to. What we want to do is to step in. We can see this. We've got the intelligence. We're watching it happen, and it's so frustrating that we don't have that resource to say, jump in, stop, and you need to get on top of this and stop it, because it's classic crime prevention. You know, it's stopping the problem before it actually happens.
Yeah,
and I think that's our struggle at the moment. And unless we have that investment, it's going to be more expensive for the whole system, not just in terms of my office, but in terms of the public authorities. It costs them money every time to have an appeal as well. So,
and is there a possibility to share resources with other SPCP supported bodies? Is that something?
There's nothing, I mean, it's such a unique enterprise that there's just no crossover with that. And we have looked at that, of course. That, you know, we've explored some of the corporate functions. What can we do with that? But even then, that's not where the pinch point for us is. Is that the corporate services is a key part to keeping the organisation going, but they're absolutely flat out themselves. And it's I think the challenge, of course, is when you share, it's not you getting something for free. You've got to give something. Yeah. So it's you might be able to share this, but you also need to give something up for that. So are you actually? I think there's often a lot put on the savings that can be made from shared services, but I think they're way overestimated. And I think, frankly, from a commissioner's perspective, it's unambitious. We need to be further.
Finally, can I just ask you the Finance Committee, as we know, had an inquiry into the commissioner landscape, and you took part in that. Can I have your reflections on that and what your thoughts are on, that?
I mean, I think I always welcome any kind of scrutiny. I think that's first thing. I think we all do as commissioners. I think the challenge that we've seen is that I don't think our functions are quite understood. I think our governance structures are entirely different. I think everyone's got a different governance structure, but that's because that fits the nature of what we're doing. I think the Parliament is missing a trick here in terms of being too narrow-focused on the commissioners. We have a 30th of 1% of the Scottish budget, the Scottish Consolidated Fund, which is minuscule in terms of savings. Where big savings need to be, from my perspective, is in terms of cross-public sector. So it should be the public sector landscape that's looked at. And also the third sector landscape, because there are, there's a whole third sector, supported third sector out there, which is, we've got to question, is that the best value? How are we best delivering this? So there's a piece here which I'm not entirely clear what the problem is that we're trying to fix, or that the others are trying to fix. From my perspective, I don't see a huge amount of savings. I think there's a danger that there will be some collateral damage on this because we're getting lumped together. So I look forward to the evidence sessions, but I think there's more that can be done in a wider scale. But I accept that the committee has its remit, and it will take that through. But I think that perhaps the initial concerns seem to be more about the proliferation of new commissioners. That is, to me, a fairly easy fix. Just don't appoint any more. It's radical, but that would fix that problem.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid that the nature of democratic politics means that those who are making those decisions have constituencies and who have parties who are all affected by the people who would like to see a commissioner for all the different interest groups. And I think that's unfortunate, but perhaps understandable.
Yeah. Just finally, just to clarify something you said a minute ago, and I possibly picked it up wrong, were you suggesting that we should cut public sector and third sector organisations?
No, I think we should consider them in the review. So, for example, there'll be different commissioners who have different impact on different in an area. So my area is slightly different, but you could see that, for example, with some of the other commissioners, where it's more of an advocacy role, that there is crossover with third sector. There's crossover with other government departments and so on. So that that's in a functional perspective. On a services perspective, I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to think that we can be compartmentalised as the commissioners should be in this building or in that building. It should be, well, who in the public sector has got space? I walk down here as I do past Edinburgh City Council. It's empty. You look in the window, there's all these spare desks. I don't understand why anyone in the public sector is looking for accommodation from private landlords when we've got all these public buildings that are empty. Now, that's the thing that I think we're missing this aspect of it, and it could have been bolder perhaps in terms of the review, albeit probably gone further.
Thank you. Thanks. That's helpful. Did you want to come in, Ewan? No.
No. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Rona. Just before I pass over to Sue, I was just going to pose a question with regard to the current organisational structure that you've got. And in the report, obviously you've got a team of 29 people, but one of the sub-notes talks about the absence of a head of corporate services, and we've talked about corporate government. You mentioned corporate governance. And it says that outstanding management assurance has been provided by the corporate services manager. And I'm just really, you raised the question of governance, but are you confident that the system that's operating at the moment in the absence of the head of corporate services matches the requirements that you currently have?
I am. I think again, this is one of the extraordinary things about small organisations, having to deal with a big organisation model. So it does seem strange that somebody has to assure me about something that happened at the meeting I just left with them. It doesn't make sense. I've actually spoke to others. Can I not self-assure? Because I was there. I am hands-on by nature of the fact we're a small organisation. If I had an organisation of 1,000, then I couldn't possibly do that. And there's a role for assurance that comes through that funnel, but not under my model.
No. But under the system that currently operates, you are assured by others and are confident in those assurances.
Yes,
that
it chimes very closely to what I think.
Yeah. I'm grateful. Sue, can I pass over to you?
I do hope the Chief Executive of the City of Edinburgh Council was listening to those remarks that I share with yourself, Mr Hamilton. You mentioned in your opening statement about the backlog and how that it has come down 55%, but there's still quite a significant amount there, and I think there is that view. I'm wondering what your view is on that performance, and because we still do have, in reality, the failure to meet the case closing target for that third year. So I was wondering if you could maybe comment on that.
Yeah, I guess the question was it the right thing to do? And the feedback we've had from a lot of applicants has been yes, it was. Of course, there are some who don't. But I think we are on the right path with that, and we are making good progress into it. We've also taken a different approach. I mean, this was all about preserving the system. So at the expense of a few, the whole system survives. Otherwise, it would be utterly disreputable if you had to wait 2 years to get an appeal through this. It had to be something different. This approach has been good as well, because we've managed to take that group of backlogged cases and approach them in different ways. So you will see that from our dashboard. It's coming in from different angles, trying to get some new ones, trying to get some old ones, trying to get, we're doing a lot more management of claims. A lot have been withdrawn, but people said, actually, I don't really need it. No one's ever asked them. I don't really need that. Okay, so
out of mischief, were they just
so actually that again has been delayed. So what we have now is a system whereby, although we've got, say, for example, in 2022, quite a lot of what it looks like a lot of cases there, they are from multiple cases of applicants. So what we get is some applicants put in lots of cases. So to preserve the system, we say to them, well, we're only doing one of yours at a time because there's a whole lot of other people waiting here. And that also forces prioritisation from their perspective, and we have a conversation with that. So there's a lot more sort of stakeholder management, which again has helped us with that. So rather than a strict chronology, which is what we do with the other cases, we've got something that is more bespoke to that particular situation, and we're coming at from different angles with the objective is getting as many cases closed as quickly as possible. We've had some early wins. That's why we're probably doing better, in truth. But I think the other cases we'll get round to, and you just need to hit one big complicated case, and it clogs up the system. But when you get 40 of the ones on the one big complicated topic, and I'm thinking about Loch Arbor, that's where you get problems because it just slows everybody down when you get into some of the big.
Yeah, and I suppose that's interesting to hear that, because some of my questions were around, are they becoming more complex, and the increased awareness of the FOI. But is there also an element where there's a dissatisfaction in public authorities and their practice around freedom of information? Is that contributing to that persistent?
I think our appeals, I think, were 95,000 FOI requests made this year, which is a continuing upward trajectory. Our caseload has continued to go up because it's typically about 0.7% of the cases in Scotland. That's sort of been static for 20 years. So what we're seeing is as awareness comes through, you see that. But we also see that it follows the economic cycle. So when people think things are bad, when buses suddenly get cut, then suddenly it's like, oh, why did that happen? And people get into it. And again, some of the interesting things I see is that some of the things I expect to be problematic don't become problematic. So I expected to see more appeals about the hate monster campaign from Police Scotland, but actually they were on that pretty quickly. They knew that was going to be contagious, get it out quickly and manage it. Equally with some of the cases that have happened in this building, it didn't really come our way because the public authorities were on it in terms of, no, this is going to be something, let's just get it out there and deal with it. Sometimes it's the ones that you don't expect that go on forever and really complicated.
So that goes somewhere, because you spoke in your opening comment about creating a culture of access and that proactive publication of documents. That's
the number one thing that a public authority can do to help itself in freedom of information, is put it out in the first place.
And you also spoke in terms of that trust and how we're not doing so well in the rankings. I suppose if people aren't trusting the information that they're getting on why a bus service is cut, then that's maybe...
The rankings, to be fair, is more about legislation.
Okay,
so it's about utilising powers. There is a separate one which talks about the practicality of that. But I think the public survey data would suggest is what we keep on. People think it is important and see the value.
Okay. So
the comment.
Well, there certainly are issues with trust amongst applicants, with some public authorities, and certainly a perception amongst a core of applicants, I think, that the authority should hold information where it doesn't.
Okay.
And obviously that leads into records management issues, which, once again, we still have the Section 61 code, and it would be good to find ways of tackling those things through interventions.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just add to that? When we see a stream of cases...
Your mic's not quite on yet. Oh. That's it on now.
It was when we see a stream of new applications coming through, that again feeds into our intervention work. So those will be flagged to us, and then we'll go in and try and address that by a phone call to stem the number of appeals coming to us. We've had that recently with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. So that's the real value that interventions add in terms of upstreaming that work.
Okay, that's super. And do you get a sense of when you might foresee that backlog being eliminated?
Well, I've got this. The funding has been from till May 26.
Okay.
If it's finished before then of course I won't use it. The promise was that we would deal with what we need it for. But hopefully by that time we might have made a business case to say, well, you can transition these staff across to intervention. And I think, you know, I suppose that's my hope, and I think most people accept it. It's just the financial practicalities of it. But for the investment, it's best value.
Mm-hmm. You?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we're continuing to engage with that backlog. It's not just sitting there static. We do allocate cases from it as resources allow without impacting on the current caseload. And we do engage with the applicants from time to time. David mentioned withdrawals. We have done a mass communication with the remaining applicants in the backlog recently that produced a fair number of firm confirmations that they wish to continue with their cases. On the other hand, it did not produce responses from a fair number of people too, and we will follow that up, and we may, obviously, with some regret, because obviously these cases have been waiting some time, but if the applicants are no longer engaged, I think we have to explore the possibility of treating these cases as abandoned.
Okay.
So that may lead to a reduction in case numbers as well.
So you've obviously been going into quite a lot of detail around the process and the So have you identified any efficiencies at all that can be made when you've been reviewing these historic or the backlog of investigations?
Well, we've certainly reviewed our procedures as part of the whole process. We are taking far more of a right first time approach with authorities. For a while, in the early days of the backlog, we asked authorities for their submissions just in general terms as soon as the cases passed through validation. That did not produce terribly meaningful submissions, even from authorities that were quite experienced in FOI. So we have reverted to asking authorities now for asking detailed questions of authorities to obtain more meaningful submissions when the cases are allocated to investigators, but equally we make it clear at that point that this is your one chance to make a case for whatever you've done with the request at an earlier stage. And we will go on to decision on the basis of the submissions we get then. If submissions are not adequate, then this may result in information being disclosed, or if, say, searches have been inadequate, of the authority being required in decision notice to go back and search again.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to move on a little bit in terms of some of the communication with Scottish ministers.
Just for a point of clarification, going back to when the backlog is going to be extinguished, you've spoken about an ideal situation where the financial provision allows you to transfer those current investigators. So are you still confident that the backlog will be no longer a backlog and gone by May next year?
Yes. On the proviso that I can't have more change of staff. That's because there is a lead time. It's a very specialist role, yes. And if we were to lose one or two members of staff and have to recruit again, it puts us right back to the beginning again, and it impacts on that pace. When we're staffed up, as we were at the end of last year with experience, we motor. But when given the recent departure, if your staffing remains when the new person comes in and is up and running, if the staffing remains constant, May 26 is still an achievable date for there to be no backlog. Yes,
thank you.
I'd be confident with that.
Thanks for that. Sue.
No problem, Convener. You mentioned again in your opening statement about interventions and how they were high risk, but they were really important in turning around culture and organisations. So what was the reason behind the increase in intervention activity that we saw in 23-24? And you did mention that it could impact your delivery on other core functions. So could you maybe expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always had interventions, and some of them have been very long-running. The Scottish Government one back from 2017. That's taken a lot of resource. It's been a journey, but we're hopefully getting to the end of that one. But the risk here is that we're trying to... I mean, for example, we've got the second Scottish Government intervention, which we've got regarding what came out of the COVID UK inquiry. We can't get near that. We've done a lot of the background work, but we can't get near it to write it down, to articulate it, put that report. We've had a lot of engagement with the government. We, of course, have spoken with Emma Martins and the work she's done, which is an excellent report. We've got concerns, which I don't think, for example, banning WhatsApp is going to solve anything, but that's something which we'll come to. So that's something that we've got clear ideas and things which we need to do, but we don't have that capacity to really get into that at the moment, and that is causing delay in the system, and that's really frustrating for us all, because we want to get that out for everyone, because this is not a Scottish Government problem, it's a public authority problem. It's for everyone. It just happens to be the Scottish Government was hit. You know? They were the ones at the inquiry. I can assure you, if you go to any public authority, everyone was using WhatsApp. Everyone's making decisions with WhatsApp. Shouldn't it be doing? Or if they were doing it, they should have been recording it properly. So this is a much wider problem. We want to be able to come out to give some practice recommendations and report on that, but we just can't get near it because we've got so many other crocodiles that are closer to the canoe.
And resource to use people, isn't it?
And resource to people, yeah.
And expertise, so you've already outlined some of that. And that also goes back to, I suppose you said at the beginning that the reputation of Scotland is slipping in terms of transparency, and the delay and the inability to progress these things doesn't help that either, does it?
It doesn't, and again, so that's something, again, it's just we have to keep, we've got a lot of things we're trying to balance and throw up in the air and keep moving, and it's an incredible testimony to my staff that they managed to keep the whole thing going, because people are paddling like crazy underwater trying to keep this going. And it's, you know, there are important things. There is a reputational risk for Scotland, is my genuine belief regarding this. And it's, as we stop designating, as it's just stalled. And you know, when the Act was initially introduced, it was meant to be a regular thing that organisations were designated and growing. And I don't think that we are in a position now that's at all tolerable in terms of what public expect of public authorities, particularly in a changing landscape of governance and structures. You know, we didn't have all these different organisations and leisure trusts and, you know, care sector involvement of different organisations. That's all changed since the beginning, and it has to keep up, and it's not.
And it's a very complex, as you've said, a growing space. So how often do public authorities or any of those organisations you've mentioned there actually engage with yourself to improve their own practice? Are they?
Claire, that's probably more your sort of sphere.
So we do a variety of work in terms of, we're constantly engaging with public authorities across the sphere. We have network groups which we attend to share practice among public authorities. We obviously do our intervention work when we can. We obviously monitor performance through statistical returns as well. And we, for example, this year we did a series of webinars where practitioners were invited to come along and learn about our new approach to investigations. So we try to be proactive as possible when we do make changes, and obviously to share good practice as well. We have monthly newsletters going out. We have a practitioner events and conferences every year. So we do try as much as possible to share good practice amongst public authorities. And I have to say, we do have a really good relationship with practitioners out there. So it's a good relationship with the regulator and us. Yeah.
So you spoke there about my last question, convener, if that's okay. You know, the commission. How does the commissioner decide to undertake any specific intervention activity, and to what extent does that take place in response to yourselves identifying failure to follow good practice?
Again,
Claire.
this is-
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this briefly earlier, but we monitor the quarterly statistics returns, and we obviously monitor any practice issues that are coming through our case handling system, any inquiries. Sometimes people come to us directly to raise concerns, and then we analyse all that data together to identify where there is practice issues, and then we'll make a decision at SMT level as to whether or not we open an intervention, whether we've got the resources to open an intervention, or we just continue to monitor that authority until such times that we have to step in. But as I say, it very much resource features heavily in that decision making.
Will be the odd case where we identify something individually that's sufficiently serious that we have to make an immediate intervention.
Do you want me to go on to do the next little bit, convener?
I was happy to pass over to Joe.
Joe, and then for me to come
Yeah, and come in on that.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. I think before I cover these questions, you talked a little bit earlier on about proactive release, and I think ultimately proactive release is one of the tools that will help the landscape become more easy to navigate. One of the challenges in the past has been that there's been a suggestion that perhaps that could lead to information dumps, so it actually then becomes really difficult. You mentioned AI earlier, and I wonder if our artificial intelligence assistants might actually take the risk of that information dump away, because you've got this tool that then can go through screeds of stuff and pull out what people are wanting in a way that's accessible.
So I think I've never subscribed to the information dump, because I know this thing called search engines, which are quite helpful. And I think, essentially that is an artificial intelligence. A search engine it's an assistive technology that is doing this. And I think we're now in a position where we're seeing technologies coming through that can summarise and give people the information that they want. The guardrails that need to be in place, though, have got to be things about what you don't want to go out. So about private data, for example. And I don't ever want to see us in a position, I don't think there ever will be a situation where a machine is going to be deciding what information can be given out in terms of an information request, because ultimately it's going to come back on the authority, and the legislation is fairly clear whether it's a machine or a human. I don't know if any authority is going to put its trust in a machine getting it right every time. So I think we're a long, long way away from that. What I do see, though, is the ability for assistive technology, as you say there, in terms of summarising and looking at things. And as long as it goes back to reference points, then I'm pretty comfortable in that. So I think it's an exciting area of to look at. But I was looking at the amount of data which is held in the world at the moment is something like 490 zettabytes, which is 10 to the power of 27. That's going to increase 5-fold by the time I demit office. Yep. So there's nothing to suggest that the public sector in Scotland should be any different to that. So what we'll just see is more and more data being held, and it needs to be managed, and the whole records management piece is a colossal challenge on this, and also how you find it, and I suppose that's about where I come in, is how do organisations find their way through that data, and if you're doing that exercise, you'd be as well allowing anyone to do it. Some quite good examples from SEPA, where I think 40% of their applications are from consultants. And they're now looking at it saying, maybe we could just help them self-serve, because they know what they're doing and they can work it through. So yeah, there's opportunities.
Okay, that sounds really good. It sounds like something we should be encouraging, and potentially can save organisations money, and therefore then save yourselves having to go and complain if people are getting the information. So one of the areas I was wanting to ask about, you mentioned it in the opening about practice interventions and how you're currently doing that, but you're funding that from core. Obviously, there would be a hope that the practice intervention would reduce demand later, so there's a bit of a payoff. But I guess just to give you the opportunity to say a little bit more about whether that you're seeing that in the cases, are you seeing that benefit?
Yeah, I think the Scottish Government is a great example of that. So when we started off, their performance was not particularly good. I think it would be fair to say, and they would accept that themselves. However, that has changed greatly now. So we're now 97% average on time for responses, where it was down in the, I think it was down in the 70s And that wasn't necessarily just to do with COVID, that actually goes back to 2017. So that has been transformational, the way that the Scottish Government has turned around its performance in freedom of information. And again, that comes down to leadership, and particularly the Permanent Secretary, who has really made this something within the organisation. And he invited me just end of last year to speak to all the Scottish Government directors, and I was talking to them and saying, listen, you're doing a great job, because it is every civil servant I meet, it is ingrained into them now, freedom of information. It is monitored, it is looked at, it's something that the directors are held accountable to. And I think that's the type of leadership and type of model that we need to see in the further public, across the public sector.
That's good. So, if that doesn't work, or if you haven't managed to do that, you obviously have your various levels of intervention. I wonder if you could just give us a wee outline for the record about the different levels of intensity of your resource, if you're having to...
Sure. Cliff, can I ask you again, because this is really your expertise, this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 4 different levels of intervention. One is a level 1, which is a simple failure to follow good practice. So this is where a member of our staff is identified through perhaps a case handling issue. So they'll perhaps pick up the phone and speak to the practitioner and address that particular issue. It might be something to do with the content of their notices, or they've miscalculated the statutory time frame. So that's a quick and easy win, is a level 1. If it's more ingrained in that, then it'll be a level 2, which we call a practice failure. So a member of our staff will raise this with the chief executive level to try and get the issue addressed. And then we move on to level 3, and that's for more serious and systematic practice failures, where the Commissioner himself will get in contact with the Chief Executive and will require a detailed action plan to be put into place, and there'll be continued monitoring on our part and continued communication with that authority. And they can last in excess of a year to turn around practice. So when it becomes a level 3 intervention, that's where it becomes a real resource issue for us. And then we have a level above that, which is a level 4 intervention, which can vary in terms of resource requirement. It could be very resource intensive, but the only one that we've had was a very discrete issue that we were able to turn around fairly quickly. But it required quite a serious contact with the authority. So, yeah, level 3s are where we get the best impact, but obviously it requires quite a substantial amount of our resource to continue monitoring that authority.
Okay, good. So looking at some of the level 2 interventions, I wonder if you're able to give us an update on the interventions with Midlothian Council, SEPA and CES. Are at level 2?
Yeah, absolutely. So Midlothian Council has now been was a level 1, has been raised to a level 2. They are making good progress, and we actually have a soundbite from here from their legal services manager who told us our intervention has changed behaviours. They were very thankful for our intervention. It got the resource they needed within their department to turn practice around. So we're looking to hopefully close that shortly, and they're responding to in excess of 85% of requests on time. The other interventions that you asked about were SEPA. SEPA, we've actually closed this intervention in December. We opened this intervention in December 2020 after the cyber incident. There's a very unique set of circumstances, and obviously access to information was just one of the issues that they were grappling with. It was quite a serious incident for them. When we were able to start collecting statistics from SEPA, they were only responding to 14% of the requests on time, and over time had built up a substantial backlog. So we supported SEPA in developing strategies on how to deal with their backlog and how to start improving performance. We were able to close this intervention formally. David met with the Chief Exec in December after they consistently responded to over 90% of requests on time for a period of 4 to 5 months. And they have dealt with their backlog, and they have changed culture in that they are looking towards more proactive publication. They're looking at a more sustainable regime, as they've identified request numbers are continually going up, so the regime has to be sustainable. So that's a very good news story, and it was a very positive experience with SEPA as well. Sorry, the last...
Yeah, Western Isles.
Western Isles, again, that was another cyber incident. So we were able actually to put them into contact with SEPA to get some advice and some learning from their experience. And we're working on getting their information onto their key information onto their website and build up practice again. But again, another positive dialogue with Western Isles, and we'll continue to support them until we're satisfied that they've got a sustainable regime.
So I think that's really good to hear that progress, and I suppose it's good that we're able to spread a light on that, because if there are intentions to expand the scheme, those areas are terrified of being covered, and I guess we need to help them be not so scared about what's coming, and actually realise that this is not just good for public information, it's going to be good for those organisations, and actually there's a way through.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
I think if I could just add to that, I think everyone who goes through the experience from a public authority side comes out with a positive experience of it's supportive, and intervention sounds quite aggressive and intrusive, but as you can see, two of these organisations were digitally on their knees when we first got in touch with them, and we've supported them with that and what they can and can't do, to giving them that assurance that we're not going to give you a hard time over this, we understand, and do that. So that's been great. And the higher ones as well, again, we just see time after time turning it round, and one of our previous interventions actually got an award for one of our FOI awards, which was for their performance, and again that's a great news story. If somebody's been failing, now winning an award.
And Claire also mentioned the level 1 interventions, and this is where we can, albeit in small steps, make an impact at the front line during casework. Very often at the earliest stages of our investigations, a lot of these are dealt with by our validation officers as cases come in contact with the authorities on FOI staff, and I don't think we should underestimate the impact these can have.
Good. Thank you.
Prevention over the cure. I was just going to highlight, I think it was interesting, I think it was Midlothian, Claire, that you said, that used the intervention to acquire additional resource.
Yes, that's quite common.
Sue, did you want to come back?
Mr Hampton, you did mention that there was 2 level 3 interventions with the Scottish ministers. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe, and you did provide some information, but maybe a little bit more about what would you have expected the Scottish Government's performance to be at this point by now, which would have allowed the intervention, which began in 2017, to conclude?
So that's coming to the later stages of the last stage. We're at the assessment stage now. So we are reviewing now on a qualitative basis. So we've done the quantitative basis, and we're content with that. But we need to look at the qualities. Is that working properly? The process is working properly. And that's now getting looked at. We're doing a retrospective review of the last quarter to see how that's done. And it's our intention, our hope, is that if we're satisfied with that, then we can close this off finally this year. This would be great. And by springtime, early this year, that time.
So can you shed any light on the reasons for it being so protracted in terms of...
To be fair, it's been a bit of a journey. It started off, things got better, then COVID hit, things got bad, then they stayed bad after COVID, and we had to a little bit of acceleration, accelerant put onto the flames.
Is that you encouraging things there with your hand action?
That's exactly what I was trying to do, yes. So this was very much my predecessor who was involved in this, and a lot of learning has come out of that, and I think where we see ourselves now is that is an entirely different approach and system that is being used within the civil service, which is quite impressive. There are always standout cases. Not mentioning the elephant in the room, but there are normally, the vast majority, 6,000 cases, I think, a year dealt with. That's
And you also mentioned, and I'm going to use the wording here because it's quite amusing because it's brand free, whether the Commissioner can provide an overview of the intervention relating to the use of non-corporate messaging tools. And if you are able to provide an idea of how lengthy a process this intervention is likely to be. You have already shared some of your frustrations around that.
I mean, I think in truth we would like to have been further down the road than we are with it. But it's quite simply a resourcing issue, and we've got to balance out the demands across the organisation, because we can't just stop doing something. There's too many things going on that are also interlinked. I think that the Emma Martin's review was very useful. We had good engagement with Emma, and her recommendations, I thought actually at first I thought it was good, but on reflection I think it's very good. Where she was dealt with a lot about the cultural piece, which is what this is, because I think the danger of focusing in on specific technologies is a problem, because technology is changing. So it's got to be about principles. So one of the things which the FOI legislation, in my view, is very strong on is information held. Now, that information can be held on paper, it can be on a server, it can be in the cloud, it can be on your phone, your work phone, it can be in your personal phone. If it's relating to the business, it's held. And I think that broad definition is actually very helpful. So when I see people trying to say, oh, can maybe try not to have, I think it was an observatory on racial equality or something like that, and that was announced as saying that's going to be FOI exempt because we're not going to hold the data on our servers. Or we're not going to hold it, but we'll just have it we'll hold it for them, but it's not our data. Well, if you're holding data, then I think we're probably into territory which is, that's not going to work. So I think it's that whole piece as to the where information is held, it will get reinforced by this, but ultimately it is about behaviours. And WhatsApp, I see actually, and other formal messaging platforms are, for me, more about replacing conversation than they are about replacing email. And I think we've always gone on the basis that if I had a conversation with somebody and I should be recording that, and that should be part of my official record. If I don't record it, then that's on me if I should have done so, and I'm at fault. WhatsApp in a similar way is, as long as that information is recorded, and the key thing for that, then that's what I'm interested in. I want to make sure that people can understand how decisions were made, why things happened, not just have a conversation and not record it, not just have a WhatsApp conversation and record it. It's got to be more than that. So I think there's a bit of work here which we really want to get right and make sure that it's applicable to all platforms, and it's something that's sustainable. And I think that's where the Emma Martin's review has been very good about the behavioural piece, which is very strong in her report. And I think that's something that we want to see how we can embrace that.
Sustainable and clearly understood. So I think that's
absolutely yes, yeah, and it's also got to be workable, because water finds the easiest route, and if we don't give people platforms that are usable, then they will find other ways of doing it. So it's got to be something that's pragmatic as well, and I'm very conscious of that as well. That, I hate not being able to use a technology that would make my life easier because it's been interpreted the wrong way.
Okay, thank you for that, David. Thank you, Convener.
Interestingly, it carries on to what I was going to touch. You'd be glad to know we're coming to the end of this, which is regard to the Code of Practice, the Section 60, and it is a code of practice rather than anything else. And you talked earlier about the engagement that the Scottish Government have had about this. We've also talked about the legislative challenges that there are. But the Section 60 code can be updated, hopefully will be updated. Do you see, not as an answer to some of the legislative problems, but to some of the discussions we've had about that cultural need to change that understanding, am I looking too hard at the code as a possible short-term answer, or is that going to be something that's going to be achievable in the near future?
Near future is not a word I associate with freedom of information. In Narnia, I think the Section 60 Code does provide an avenue for making changes and productive changes. But again, it's when that comes through, and it does move so slowly, and it's queued, and it's. I don't hold out great hope for seeing anything in the near future. However, it is a route, and you never know; it may even be overtaken by a private member's bill. In which case we probably have to look at the whole thing again, which could be interesting. But no, there's certain things that could be in that, and we've certainly fed back into that. So the consultation work, whenever that happens, will be interesting.
Thank you for that. If there's anything that comes to mind after this session, please feel free to write, contact the clerks about it. And I was just going to highlight what I thought was a really interesting penultimate paragraph in your Commissioner's statement, because we are on the 20th anniversary. Maybe it should not have passed its 10th anniversary, but here we are in the 20th anniversary, and also what we have touched on in a number of matters is the need for the proactive publication. We live in a digital age, we have AI, whatever that means to different people, and the landscape is changing very, very rapidly, and there seems to be a need for us to certainly consider that as soon as this Parliament is able to. So, Ewan, Claire, and especially to you, David Hamilton, Commissioner, can I thank you for your attendance today and look forward to engaging in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, Committee.
And I will now close the public part of this meeting.